Hi, I'm Venora. A security guard told me I wasn't allowed to enter my niece's graduation because I looked too low class. But the truth? That line didn't come from him. It came from my sister. They had a seat saved for everyone but me. A photo framed without my face. A speech that spoke of family and never once said my name. And yet, I stayed. What kind of family draws the line so carefully that it cuts you out without ever raising their voice? And what happens when the silence finally speaks back? I arrived just before the crowd thickened. Savannah had a particular kind of heat that morning, damp, heavy, and quietly unforgiving. The sun hadn't yet reached its peak, but my blouse clung to the small of my back by the time I stepped out of the Uber. I clutched the bouquet tight, trying not to bruise the petals. They were pink, soft, familiar. Isley always loved peonies. She called them grandma flowers when she was 5, and it stuck. The gymnasium stood ahead, flags fluttering with unnecessary pride. I walked past families in coordinated outfits, uncles in lawn chairs, cousins laughing with overexposed cameras. I wasn't dressed to match anyone's expectations, simple black dress, flat sandals, hair pulled back. I had no purse, just my phone, the bouquet, and my name already sent in on the RSVP weeks ago. A young security guard, no older than Isley, stepped in front of me. Clipboard in hand, he squinted at me like I was the one who'd wandered off the sidewalk. "Mom, name please?" "Venora Dre," I said, steady. He flipped through the list and stalled. His lips twisted into an uncomfortable smile, the kind you see when someone's following instructions they don't understand. So we were told this is a private seating area today. Only certain family members are being allowed through. I'm on the list, I said calmly, showing him the email confirmation on my phone. He didn't even look at it. Right. But we were also told not to admit anyone too low-class looking. Their words, not mine. I blinked. Once. And then again, not because I didn't hear him, but because it took a second to decide whether I was going to walk through him or around him. I did neither. I just stood there. Stillness isn't weakness. It's what you do when the other person doesn't realize the ground beneath them is shifting. I didn't ask for clarification. I didn't raise my voice. I let the silence do the heavy lifting. He fidgeted, looked over my shoulder as if someone would come save him from the awkwardness. No one did. I thought of the message Callista sent me earlier that morning. Just 3 lines. I hope today won't be uncomfortable for you. Just remember to stay respectful. At 6:08 a.m., I thought it was concern. By 9:12, it was a loaded gunshed cocked the night before. This wasn't the venue's error. This was my sister, preemptively making sure I stayed out of the pictures. She didn't want my presence. She wanted plausible deniability. The security guard shifted his weight. "There's a secondary overflow area if you want to sit." "No," I said, with no spike in my tone. "This is where I'm supposed to be." He hesitated, then stepped aside more out of confusion than permission. I walked forward. Inside, the air was thick with perfume and overused floor wax. Folding chairs formed perfect rows. Parents stood shoulder to shoulder, whispering names, pointing toward the stage. Banners screamed, "Class of 2024. I saw the seats with last names printed neatly on index cards. None of them said Dre. Not even guest of Isley. One of the volunteers, clipboard in hand, approached. "Mom, can I help you find your spot?" "I found it," I said, choosing the 4th row on the end, close enough to be visible, far enough to be forgotten. The chair wobbled slightly when I sat. The peonies rested in my lap, one petal already browning at the edge. I could feel eyes scanning me. Not directly, not enough to confront, just enough to make sure I knew I didn't belong. Somewhere, someone coughed. Somewhere else, laughter. But near me? Silence. And then, I saw him. An older man, standing off near the back corner. Tan suit, silver tie, cane. He wasn't looking through me. He was looking at me. A slow nod. No smile, just acknowledgement. No one else noticed. I pressed my hand against the bouquet, steadying it, like it might shake loose otherwise. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't close, but because crying would have given it all away. And I wasn't here to make anyone comfortable. I was here because I belonged. And if they couldn't say my name, they'd have to sit with my silence. She never saw the real one. I did. And it wasn't from the school. The fake invitation had Callista's signature written all over it, elegant fonts, a logo at the bottom that didn't belong to any academic institution. I remember thinking it was odd when Mom handed it to me, with a smile like it came from the principal's desk. But I didn't say anything then. I wanted peace. Or maybe I wanted a reason to believe Callista had finally come around. I should have known better. Once I stepped past that young security guard, no one exactly welcomed me in. A volunteer with too much perfume and not enough warmth pointed toward the far side of the gym, past rows of white folding chairs labeled family reserved. She led me through the crowd like a guest who'd gotten the address wrong. "That's the best we can do," she said, nodding at a seat tucked near the side, exit across from the janitor's closet and directly beside the restroom sign. This whole section's overflow. Overflow. That word sat in my chest like wet concrete. Overflow meant extra. Leftover, disposable. The seat wobbled when I sat. No name card, no welcome. Just the sound of someone a few rows up snickering behind their hand. "They probably seated people by tax bracket," a woman said to her friend, loud enough for it to reach me. No one corrected her. No one chuckled either. Just silence, the kind that thickens rather than clears. I adjusted my posture, carefully shifting the bouquet on my lap so the tissue paper wouldn't crinkle. One of the petals looked bruised now, darker along the edge. Maybe it was always like that. Maybe it happened when I stood too long at the door, waiting for permission to exist. The program hadn't started yet. People milled around, finding their places, sipping on water bottles, fanning themselves with printed schedules. A student tripped over a folding chair, and someone laughed. I stood slowly and walked toward the check-in table. I told myself I just wanted to confirm my RSVP, but I already knew what I was looking for. The woman at the table smiled tightly when I approached. "Can I help you, Mom?" "Yes. I just wanted to make sure I'm marked down as present." She turned to the binder on the table, pages laminated, tabbed by last name. And there it was. Page 3. Venora Dre. My name. My email. My confirmation code. A perfect horizontal red line slashed through it like a wound. There was no mistake in the ink. It was unmistakably Callista's handwriting, tight, slanted, always slightly to the right. "Oh, that's probably from an earlier version," the woman stammered, her hand snapping the binder shut. I didn't argue, didn't accuse. Just nodded and walked back to my seat by the exit. 1 foot in the room, 1 foot in the hallway, like even the building didn't know where to place me. I watched as parents fussed over ties, fluffed up graduation caps, handed off tissues. The front rows were all labeled with names I recognized. Friends of the family, neighbors, people who once borrowed sugar from our mother and never returned the dish. I pulled out my phone, not to take pictures, not to post, just to hold on to something that was mine. I didn't text anyone. I didn't need to. The message had already been delivered loud and clear. The quiet around me wasn't accidental. It was designed, curated. Like every empty gesture and missing chair was part of an exhibit called "How to Erase a Woman Without Making a Scene." Still, I wasn't ready to leave. But I wasn't ready to cry either. Something shifted not in the room, but in me. A slow, steady pulse that hadn't existed in years. It wasn't rage. It wasn't sadness. It was the start of something sharper. I leaned back in the chair, one hand still on the bouquet, the other on my thigh, grounding me. I stared at the stage as a student walked across for sound check. The microphone squealed once, then fell silent again. No one noticed me, but they would. She didn't have to say my name. The silence said enough. I stayed seated longer than I meant to, staring at the corners of the gym where the breeze from the vents couldn't quite reach. The flowers on my lap were beginning to wilt, and I wasn't sure if it was the heat or something else weighing them down. That's when the invitation came back to me, One Mom handed me with such pride, as if it had come sealed with gold. I remember the envelope, thick and creamy, with a ribbon tied around the flap. "The family cordially invites you." It read in script that looked too elegant to be school-issued. Back then, I didn't think much of the small logo printed on the bottom corner. Now I did. Bryn Events, Callista's company. I took out my phone, scrolled through my inbox until I found the original confirmation email from the school. It was plain, straightforward, no ribbons, no flourishes, black and white font, sent from a district address, no sign of Bryn Events. Then I found the forwarded message Mom had shown me, clean layout, faux calligraphy, and at the bottom, right beneath the RSVP button, it said, "Designed and coordinated by Bryn Events." A story curated for Mom's peace of mind. A cover operation to make sure I believed I was always welcome. That's the trick about people like Callista. They don't need to lie outright. They just make sure the truth never gets printed. I wasn't dealing with a misunderstanding. I was dealing with a campaign. The mic was being tested again near the stage. The sound tech gave it a few thumps and stepped away. I glanced at the rows of guests. Those sitting up front wore carefully chosen clothes, touched-up makeup, expressions that said they belonged. And then a woman brushed past me and smiled. "Nice to see you again," she said. "You looked amazing at the brunch last month." I blinked. Brunch? There was no brunch for me last month. I hadn't been invited. But my body responded on autopilot. I smiled, nodded, and said, "Thank you." The woman moved on, unaware that her casual greeting had just burned a hole through a week's worth of therapy sessions. This wasn't forgetting. This was rewriting. I sat back down and tried to ground myself in the present. I was here. The real me. Not the version they tried to paint over or crop out. A small child nearby tugged on their mother's dress, asking for a snack. I watched as the woman leaned down and handed over a sandwich, then adjusted the child's cap with a gentle touch. It should have made me feel warm, but it didn't. It made me ache. Because I remembered holding Isley's hand as we walked through her first day of kindergarten. I remembered brushing her hair into messy ponytails when Callista had late meetings. I remembered her once calling me her fun mom when she couldn't find the word aunt. Those memories didn't exist in their version of today. And the worst part? They were never going to. It all came into focus. The fake invitation, the name crossed out, the brunch that didn't include me. This wasn't about seating arrangements or clerical errors. This was a full erasure executed with elegance and wrapped in polite avoidance. I had become a liability to their narrative. They couldn't risk a photo, a hug, or a quote that didn't align with the image Callista had worked so hard to maintain. I wanted to be angry. But the truth was colder than rage. I wasn't forgotten. I was removed. I looked up at the stage and watched a staff member tape down the final edge of a banner that had started to curl. "Congratulations, class of 2024, it said in looping silver letters. None of it felt real. But I was still there. Still breathing. Still not going anywhere. I shifted in my chair, forcing it to steady under me. No one offered me help. No one looked my way. I tapped my phone screen, checked the time, and opened my notes app. I began to type. Not a post, not a message, just a list. Of things they couldn't erase. Isley's laugh after ice cream. Mom calling me at 2 a.m. the night she collapsed. Not Callista. The Christmas I bought all the gifts because Callista forgot. The year I took unpaid leave to care for Loretta. The version of me they didn't want to remember. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I didn't need them to say my name out loud, because I was finally saying it to myself. When the microphone clicked on and I heard my sister's voice, I knew what was coming. She didn't have to say my name. The silence said enough. The room settled into a hushed buzz as a staff member approached the podium. She adjusted the mic, then smiled toward the audience like she'd been waiting for her cue all morning. "We're honored to share a special message from one of our most generous alumni sponsors," she said, clearly rehearsed. "Callista Dre." And there it was. My sister's voice filled the gym like perfume sweet, practiced, cloying. She didn't stumble. Not even once. I'm proud to support this incredible class, her voice cooed from the speakers, warm and perfectly paced. Our family has always stood for tradition, grace, and showing up with dignity no matter what the world throws our way. I felt that line hit my spine like ice water. Our family has always stood for there was no mistake in the phrasing, no accidental omission. She was drawing the boundary line right there, over a sound system, in front of hundreds of people. And my name wasn't inside it. Not once. Not even a gesture. Not on my sister or on behalf of my family. Just airbrushed perfection and the subtle framing of a legacy I apparently had no place in. A wave of applause followed. People clapped not wildly, but politely. The kind of clapping that says, "She's someone important. Don't you forget it." Some even turned toward her row, giving that nod of approval reserved for people who donate gymnasiums or get buildings named after them. I didn't turn to look at her. I didn't need to. I already knew what I'd see. The modest hand wave, the gracious smile, the posture of a woman who'd mastered the art of appearing humble while orchestrating an entire narrative around herself. It wasn't rage I felt in that moment. It was awe. Callista had weaponized civility. She knew exactly how to speak about unity while carving people out of her story. And the room, the whole room, was being trained to believe that I wasn't missing because it'd never been part of the picture to begin with. I replayed every word in my head, trying to find the loophole, the breadcrumb, the throwaway mention that would say, "I see you." But there was nothing. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was strategy. Polished, subtle, executed like a marketing campaign. I gripped the edge of my seat, my fingers tensed. The program in my lap crinkled beneath my palm. The instinct to rise, to shout, to call her bluff it surged up like heat in my throat. For a second, I imagined standing, pointing, making the moment too loud to ignore. But that's what Callista counted on. She was always ready for my reaction. That's how she stayed the saint bee, letting me look like the storm. So I didn't move. I swallowed the burn in my chest and adjusted the strap on my sandal instead. It was loose. Funny what you notice when the rest of the world is applauding your erasure. No one beside me reacted. The man to my left scrolled his phone. The woman to my right dabbed her eyes with a tissue, probably thinking of her own child walking across the stage soon. And me? I sat still, completely still, and made a choice. If she wasn't going to say my name, I'd be the one who chose what got said next. Not by yelling, not by interrupting her symphony of falsehoods, but by standing in quiet defiance of the script she'd written without me in it. That was the line, right there. Not when she lied, but when I decided I wouldn't help her do it. I caught Isley's eyes from across the crowd, and I saw something flicker I hadn't seen in years. She looked away, but not before I noticed the confusion, and maybe, just maybe, a crack. The roses I brought were gone, but so was the last of my hesitation. From my spot near the exit, I scanned the rows once more, my gaze drifting not toward the stage this time, but to the people. The ones clapping, the ones posing, the ones playing parts. That's when my eyes landed on Isley. She was 3 rows up, sitting beside Callista, angled just right for the cameras. Her cap tilted slightly off-center, and even from a distance, I could tell she hadn't noticed. Then, in a flicker, she did. Our eyes met. Not long, not boldly, but just enough. There was a pause, like a stutter in time. And in that hesitation, something rippled a recognition, confusion. Guilt? I couldn't be sure, because just as quickly she looked away, and it hurt more than I expected it to. Because for a split second, I thought maybe she remembered. Remembered how I used to braid her hair, how I sang her to sleep when Callista was too tired or too busy to bother, how I once drove 4 hours just to watch her play a 6-minute violin solo. But now, even Isley was learning the new script. I stood slowly, not because I planned to make a scene, but because I couldn't breathe in that seat any longer. I made my way toward the refreshments table, weaving through the bodies like a ghost. And there she was, Loretta, our mother. laughing with a neighbor from church, glass of iced tea in hand like this was a backyard barbecue. I waited until her laughter dimmed, then stepped in close. "Did you know what Callista did?" I asked, quiet enough for only her. She hesitated. I could feel her body pull back, her gaze slipping sideways. "She told me you never confirmed. And well, today isn't the time." Of course it wasn't. Today's never the time when the lie is polished and the truth is messy. I nodded once. Not in agreement, just in acknowledgement. She wouldn't fight for me, not here, not ever, maybe. I turned and walked away before she could say anything else. I didn't need her justifications. I'd heard them in different forms for years. She means well. She's under a lot of pressure. She's just trying to protect the family. But silence isn't neutral. Silence takes sides. And Loretta had chosen hers long ago. I stood beside a fake ficus tree, tucked near the venue doors. People passed by me with plates of cheese cubes and plastic cups of lemonade, and none of them looked twice. I was dressed like them, smiled politely like them, but I wasn't in the frame. I wasn't part of the version of this day they wanted remembered. That stung, but not in the same way anymore. This time, it burned with clarity. I reached for my phone, thumb hovering over the screen. No text from Callista, of course. Just a single message from Simone, my college roommate. "You there? I saw the school tagged your sister. Wanted to make sure you're okay." I stared at the blinking cursor for a few seconds, then typed, "Yes." Still here, not going anywhere. And for the first time all day, I believed it. I made my way back to my seat still unlabeled, still near the exit, and sat with my shoulders squared. I didn't slouch. I didn't hide. I placed my phone in my lap like a statement. This was my line, my quiet defiance. I wouldn't raise my voice, but I also wouldn't retreat. If they wanted me gone, they'd have to say it out loud this time, because I was done playing the silent role they wrote for me. They ignored the first warning, so I made sure the next one couldn't be ignored. The roses I brought were gone, but so was the last of my hesitation. The event planner brushed past me like I wasn't there until I spoke loud enough to make them stop. But even before that moment, I had already felt it in my gut. I walked to the staff table, the one where special deliveries were placed, flowers, cards, little things meant to be seen at just the right time. "Excuse me," I asked gently. "Did the bouquet for Isley get delivered?" The young volunteer looked startled, flipping through a small notepad. Then, after a pause, she motioned behind her toward a dim corner by the door between a utility rack and a recycling bin. There it was, my bouquet, still tied in the same wrapping it used hours earlier. Peonies, just like she liked. Only now the ribbon was loose, and the small white card had written on the one that said, "Proud of you always." Auntie was missing. The volunteer offered no explanation. Just a polite nod and the kind of tight-lipped smile that comes with working events like these. I thanked her and walked away, carrying nothing but the sound of my own shoes on the floor. Back at my seat, the same wobbly chair near the exit, I noticed something new. A folded card tucked under the cushion. Staff reserved. The tape was still tacky. Someone had peeled it off not long ago, probably in a rush after realizing I wasn't supposed to have a labeled seat at all. It didn't shock me, not anymore. No one had planned for me to be visible. I wasn't on the list, not in the rows, and clearly not on the gift table either. But I sat anyway. I crossed my ankles, adjusted the hem of my dress, and placed my hands in my lap as if I were meant to be there all along. A woman in a floral blouse glanced at me from a few seats over. She didn't say anything, but I saw it in her eyes. Confusion, judgment, maybe just curiosity. Let her wonder. I didn't clap when Callista's name was mentioned again. I didn't join the standing ovation when she was thanked for her generous contributions to this year's celebration. Instead, I turned and looked directly at the organizer, standing at the edge of the aisle, headset in place, scanning the crowd like a stage director. She met my eyes for a moment. I didn't blink. When another usher approached me during a pause in the ceremony, holding a program and pretending to check names. I raised my phone, pulled up my RSVP confirmation, and held it out. "I'm not moving again," I said clearly. "Please inform whoever needs to hear that." He didn't argue, just nodded and backed away. That was my line drawn in the sand. I wasn't interested in theatrics. I wasn't planning to make a scene, but I would no longer allow them to slide me quietly out of the frame. Back at the staff table, I returned with my phone out, taking a picture of the discarded bouquet. The flowers were starting to droop. Then I snapped a second photo of the nameplate marked "Staff Reserved." Not for revenge, not even for justice, for record. Because when history is being rewritten in real time, you'd better keep your own receipts. I knew what this was. A campaign of omission. Each act just small enough to be deniable. Each insult dressed in professionalism. But it's seen enough. That chair, that corner, that bouquet, they weren't mistakes. They were the architecture of erasure. And today, I wasn't just sitting through it. Today, I stayed planted. Then came the mistake they didn't think I'd notice, but I did. And I wasn't quiet about it. The event planner brushed past me like I wasn't there until I spoke loud enough to make them stop. After they did, I sat still again. Not because I was tired, but because I needed to be still to breathe. I tapped my phone out of habit, more out of muscle memory than intention. Notifications lit the screen group chats buzzing with proud mom selfies, tagged photos from the school's official page, alumni hashtags. Then I saw it. Callista's post. It was already up. A picture Isley in her gown, grinning beneath the school's banner. Loretta, her hand on Isley's shoulder. Callista, perfectly framed on the opposite side. Modest grin, chin slightly tilted down like she hadn't spent the entire day architecting this shot. The caption read, "Family is who shows up. With grace, class, and no need to prove anything." I read it twice. Then again, I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone. But my stomach clenched so tight I had to put both feet flat on the floor to stay grounded. It wasn't just a caption, it was a scalpel, and she wielded it like only someone who believed themselves invincible could. I stood up, not rushed, not dramatic, and walked to the far side of the gym where the photography station had been set up. Folding lights, a volunteer with a clipboard, small children being told to smile bigger. I approached a staff member who looked vaguely in charge. "Hi," I said with a calm I didn't feel. "Can I ask something?" "Of course. Why wasn't my name included on the seating list?" They blinked twice before answering. "We were told to leave it off," they said quietly. Then added, "I assumed it was a family request." There it was again. Family, weaponized, used as both shield and sword, always on her terms. I nodded once, didn't argue, didn't explain, and walked away. That should have been enough. But it wasn't. Because just as I was making my way back toward my seat, a young man in a white shirt and catering apron flagged me down, 2 trays of food balanced in his arms. "Mom, could you give me a hand real quick with these?" It took me half a second to realize what he meant. He thought I worked here. Again. I looked down at my black dress, simple, clean but not glamorous. No name tag, no uniform, but apparently no distinction either. "No," I said, steady and direct. "I'm not part of the staff." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I'm family." I didn't say it loudly, but I said it clearly, and that was enough. He mumbled an apology and backed away. I returned to the seating area, but this time I didn't take the chair tucked near the exit. I didn't sit in the back like a footnote. I walked calmly to the first row, to the empty seat marked Special Gaston, left unclaimed all morning. I sat. No one told me to move. No one even made eye contact. That's the thing about people used to controlling a room. They don't know what to do when the room doesn't respond. I looked across the lawn where Callista stood talking to 2 school board members. Her hand gestures were light, graceful. Her laughter floated through the space, like she'd already decided what version of this day would survive. I didn't interrupt. I just looked at her. Not with fury. Not with hurt. With stillness. And that stillness, I noticed, started making people around me shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, just slightly, postures tightening, glances flickering, voices lowering. Even Loretta looked uneasy, suddenly reaching for her purse like she needed something to do with her hands. And for the first time all day, I spoke not to anyone specific, not into a microphone, not to reclaim a moment. Just out loud. Some truths don't need an audience, I said. They just need to be lived. And then the one voice that couldn't be scripted broke the entire illusion. It came from the last person they thought would speak. And she didn't even know she was telling the truth. The ceremony was winding down. Names had been called, tassels turned, caps adjusted. Families were already beginning to gather near the school banner for the official portrait tradition, staged like clockwork, each grouping carefully organized. I didn't move from my seat. I watched. There they were, Callista, Loretta, and Isley lined, up exactly as planned. Picture perfect from every angle. Callista held Isley's hand with one of her own, the other resting lightly on Loretta's shoulder. A staff member called out, "Everyone smile." And just before the shutter clicked, one of them glanced back at Minot, out of inclusion, but to confirm that I hadn't stepped forward. I hadn't. A photographer near the edge of the crowd motioned toward me, unaware. "Would you like to join them?" he asked. Before I could respond, Callista gave a subtle shake of her head. Barely noticeable to most, but unmistakable to me. I gave him a soft no thank you and stayed where I was. I didn't need to be in the picture, because I already knew what was coming. As the family scattered from the frame, Callista leaned down to fix the collar of Isley's gown, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Isley looked up at her, lips parted like she'd been holding onto a thought for longer than a child should. Then, with the timing of a clock tower chime, she asked Mommy, "Why did you say not to let her come?" Callista froze. The air around us didn't move. It thickened. I watched Loretta's hand slip slightly from Isley's shoulder. Her expression collapsed into something between confusion and dread. Someone behind me murmured, "Did she just say?" A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years dropped his phone. It clattered against the concrete. No one bent to pick it up. Callista straightened, fast. Her lips pulled into a smile that didn't match her eyes. "Sweetheart, let's go grab your gift bag, okay?" But the damage had already rooted itself in the ground. Because when truth comes from the mouth of a child, there's no spin that can undo it. I didn't gloat. I didn't stand. I didn't make a sound. I just looked at her. Fully. And this time, I didn't look away. The hush that followed wasn't quiet in the comforting sense. It was ruptured silence, the kind that echoes down into every version of the story they had tried to script. One of the board members, still standing near the photographer, cleared his throat. Too late. Too uncertain. A woman near the refreshment table gently set her glass down and began folding a napkin she wasn't even using. The shift had started. People didn't rally to my side, not exactly. But I saw it in the way a few heads turned toward me now, with something like apology. In the way chairs were suddenly being stacked slower. In the way Loretta kept glancing back at me, as if maybe I had something more to say. I didn't need to. Isley had already said it. Callista pulled her daughter away, with a grip that was too firm for a celebration. But before they disappeared around the side of the gym, Isley twisted her neck and looked back, right at me. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, but she didn't look away, and that was enough. Not redemption, not reunion. Just the first visible crack in a wall they'd painted over for years. The kind of moment that doesn't fix history, but makes it undeniable. The crowd disappeared, but the sting of history didn't. The gym slowly emptied, one folding chair at a time. Metal legs scraped the floor, helium balloons bumped against the ceiling, and children tugged their strings with the last of their sugar-high energy. But I didn't move. I stayed seated in the second row, hands folded in my lap, staring at nothing in particular. Not because I was waiting for someone, not because I expected a scene, but because I needed to feel that moment settle inside me raw and real. I wasn't trying to relive anything. I wasn't clinging to what had been lost. I just let it be. No one approached me. No one said my name. There were no apologies, no accidental brushes of the hand, no awkward attempts at closure wrapped in false smiles. But the silence spoke volumes, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel crushed by it. I felt clear. When the truth has been lived out loud long enough, it doesn't need to be shouted. It doesn't need a spotlight or applause. It just lingers in the air calm, firm, unshakable. Loretta passed by me on her way out. Her heels clicked softly across the floor, her purse clutched tight under her arm like it held the last ounce of her dignity. She walked past me at first, chin up, but something, maybe guilt, maybe memory stopped her at the exit. She turned. "You could have told me earlier," she said, voice low but steady. I looked at her. "I did," I replied. "You just weren't ready to hear it." I didn't raise my voice. There was no bitterness in my tone, just the weight of having told the truth too many times to people who had already decided to believe something else. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She just gave one small nod. Whether it meant understanding or simply acknowledgement, I didn't know. Then she walked into the daylight, her shadow stretching long behind her. Across the gym, I saw Callista standing alone, checking her phone with the same composure she'd worn since childhood. Her blazer looked flawless, her posture practiced, her silence absolute. But she was watching. The thing about people who live for control is that they rarely notice the moment it slips away. It doesn't come with sirens. It doesn't come with screaming. It comes quietly, like breath, like consequence. There was no apology in her face, just the quiet panic of someone who realized too late that the narrative no longer belonged to her. I didn't wave. I didn't try to make a point. I stood, picked up my bag, and walked out. I passed her without so much as a glance. That was the final statement. That was the end of that chapter. Outside, the afternoon sun wrapped everything in a thick golden heat. Cars shimmered in the lot, windshields bouncing light in every direction. Parents laughed and hugged their graduates, while toddlers ran in circles around folding tables. Life kept going. And then I heard footsteps behind Meslow, cautious. It was Isley. She didn't call out or run. She just walked until she stood beside me, silent. For a second, we didn't speak. Then she pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. A bouquet of peonies, the same ones I had quietly left behind the supply rack. "I knew they were from you," she said. She didn't say thank you. She didn't offer an explanation. She didn't need to. Those 6 words held everything: recognition, understanding, and something even rarer, truth. I nodded once. It wasn't a dismissal. It was an acceptance. A way of holding her words gently, with care. Because they were fragile and real. We stood together for another moment before she turned and walked back to her group. She didn't look back. And that was okay. She didn't have to. Because that moment, that quiet offering, was more than enough. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness wrapped in a hug. It was something quieter, more honest. It was the beginning of healing. I got into my car and shut the door. The heat had softened, but the silence inside the cabin felt thick. I didn't start the engine right away. I didn't put on music. I just sat there, listening to the steady rhythm of my own breath. I didn't relive the day. I didn't scroll through what-ifs. I just existed, fully, freely, knowing that I had shown up, that I had taken up space, that I had not been erased no matter how hard they tried to write me out. And more than that, I didn't need to be featured in their group photos or mentioned in their speeches to be real. I had been there. I had stood tall. And that, in the end, was enough. This story didn't end with me getting my spot back at their table. It ended with me realizing I didn't need to ask for one in the first place. You know, looking back, I don't regret not yelling. I don't regret not making a scene or forcing my way into their pictures. I stood where I stood because I finally understood this. Dignity doesn't shout. It endures. Sometimes being left out isn't the failure, it's the freedom. When people try to erase you, it's not always your job to convince them of your worth. It's your job to remember it for yourself and to show up anyway. To anyone watching this who's ever been excluded from a room you helped build or written out of a story you helped shape, your presence still matters. You don't need validation to be real. You don't need applause to be proud. Show up for yourself. Sit in the front row if you have to. Take the picture they didn't invite you into and frame it in your own memory. And now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been quietly erased or made to feel like you didn't belong? Drop a 1 in the comments if this story spoke to you. Let me know where you're watching from, your state, your city, even your favorite coffee shop. And if this story made you feel seen just a little, please hit that subscribe button. It means more than you know, because the next story might just be yours.